During these 8 days of the octave of Easter, each day in the liturgy we have heard one of the apparitions of Jesus, one of his visits to his former disciples since he had been raised from the dead. The first one, last Sunday, he appeared to Mary Magdalene, who was constantly with him on his journeys as one of the group of women who ministered to the needs of the 12 apostles and Jesus as they traveled preaching the word. But she didn't recognize Jesus. Very strange. Someone she knew so well, but now did not recognize him until he called her by name. And then she knew him. Today, we see Thomas, skeptical Thomas, who refuses to believe that Jesus has been raised from the dead, having his first encounter with Christ. And he comes to recognize him too, but in a different way, because he has encountered the very wounds of Christ. I think there is a message here for all of us Latter-day disciples of Jesus. We may have been with the Lord for many, many years, and slowly we have to refocus because we don't see him where he really is in our life. Sometimes we look to religion, to worship, to prayer, to lift us up and to give us peace and to take away our troubles. But very often we find Jesus coming to us in the midst of all that pain and trouble and despair, just as he did with Mary on the first Easter morning. But I think the real encounter with Jesus that we need to listen to is the one we heard today, where Thomas sees Jesus, recognizes Jesus in his wounds, because that's where Jesus is most evident in the world in which we're living, in the wounds of his brothers and sisters throughout the world, but also close to us in our families, in our local communities, and where we work. And that's where we have to recognize Jesus, in the hurting members of his mystical body. So as we come to the end of the octave of Easter and enter into those long 50 days of celebrating the Lord's conquest of sin and death, let us remember that we look for him not only in prayer, not only when we gather for liturgy, but in the wounded people we come in contact with each day of our week. Jesus will always be with us. We will always recognize him if we begin to see him not just in the peace and quiet of our religion, but in the wounded people that Jesus brings into our lives so that we can minister to them his healing presence, just as he did for us. May the days of Easter bring us closer to the Lord who rose for our salvation and died to set us free.